How's it going, guys? Welcome to podcast episode 3. We're super excited to do this. We got a few friends joining us on this episode, but I wanted to give you guys a little quick message from us before we get right into it. We have a bunch of new stuff launching. We've talked about this in previous podcast episodes, but check out the description to stay updated. We'll put some stuff down there. Hopefully you guys enjoy. We go into really cool topics during this podcast, so enjoy. How you guys doing?
Excellent.
Good. Yeah. Doing well.
Finished the holiday weekend up well.
Yeah, New Year's Day today, so, never stop the grinding.
Absolutely not.
Never could. Never will. What about you? Didn't answer the question.
Great, man.
So we have a few questions for you guys, but I guess first I'll let you guys both introduce yourself. Connor, you can go ahead and start just to give a background on who you are.
Okay. I don't know how deep you're looking for here.
As deep as you want.
So my name is Connor. I am 20. I'm a sophomore in college studying finance. Although with the way my credits are working out, I'll probably be done, or I will be done end of next summer. So kind of now in between sophomore and junior year, I guess is one way to look at it. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the broad overview. Nice. Oldest of 4. This clown. Brothers. My brother in next in line. Enjoy sports, board games, card games, video games, reading. Try to stay balanced, stay diverse with the things I'm interested in. So
yeah, for sure. And Garrett, you?
My name is Garrett. I'm 18 years old. I am a senior in high school being homeschooled. And yeah, I play basketball, play the piano here and there. Plan is to go to college next year. I don't know what I'm going to study yet, but I'm getting there. Yeah. I've got some time.
That's how it is.
So I've been told.
Yeah, I don't even know what I'm doing.
I think you have time until
you don't.
Till the week before.
Yeah, that's fair. So you have to declare the major.
Right. Yeah. And even then you can,
I guess
mess around with it and even change it while I'm there.
That's true. Yeah. Okay, so I guess to jump right into it. So you guys have both been homeschooled. And I think to a lot of people, homeschooling is like an enigma. They don't really understand it, or they have misconceptions about what homeschooling actually is. So I guess, what has your experience with homeschool been? And then maybe how has it impacted you in like social situations and just throughout your life? What are some of the good parts about it that you enjoyed? And what are some of the maybe lowlights of homeschooling?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess I'll go ahead and start. Homeschooling has definitely opened my view on just education in general. Mm-hmm. I think the curriculum that we do is really fantastic. It's called Classical Conversations. And I think being homeschooled, I now get to see how I would like my kids to be educated when I'm older, and just the integrity of what homeschooling can be. So the way that it works is that we meet one day a week at a church, and then they gave us the homework that we do, and then we go home and do the work the rest of the week. Situationally or socially, I should say, it's a bit more difficult than maybe if you were to go to public school. You have that social interaction every day. Being homeschooled, the only social interaction you have is your family, and whoever's there. So I think that's probably the downside of it is just that social interaction. Homeschoolers are pushed when they go into those social situations. Yeah, for sure.
You did get social interactions though, right? Like it wasn't like you said you go to a church. There were people there, like you had like-minded people you could interact with.
Right, like yeah. Not all homeschooling is just you in your bedroom doing school with a few pieces of paper. So yeah, there's definitely more social interaction I think most people think.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, you play basketball and things like that. So, it's not just that co-op. You obviously have church, basketball, any extracurricular you do is going to give you extra social interaction.
Right.
Yeah. You'd have to push yourself to do that though, especially if you don't have like proactive parents. If they're not,
I think it really just depends on the personality. Like I meet a lot of homeschoolers that are like every chance they get, they're in front of people. They're always wanting to talk, always wanting to be around people that aren't their family. Just like because they're just extroverted.
Right.
But you see that in public school, a lot of introverts will be forced to go to school every day, but they'll have their head down and they'll be just as socially awkward as That's a lot of homeschoolers that I've met. So
Yeah. And then you've been out of high school for a little while. You're now at college. So maybe looking back like retroactively, what were your thoughts on it, experiences, maybe some ways that it helped you and maybe it hurt you after you've gone out further?
Yeah. So certainly the benefit was the transition from high school to college. I don't want to say felt easy, but it was very smooth. It was just like the workload was about the same. The level of rigorousness of the content itself was about the same. Obviously, there's some differences between education, but that's just, you're going to get that from really any high school into college for the most part.
Yeah.
So I felt very prepared in that sense. And honestly, I don't really have many areas where I would say it was a hindrance. It really comes down to the parents. And here's what I found. It's not necessarily because like Gabe was talking about, you'll have people at public school who are more introverted, more extroverted. And it's really, I feel like the content or the types of things that the kids are exposed to and talk about. So I think, people think as homeschoolers is socially awkward, and maybe there are a higher percentage that could technically consider that.
Yeah.
But I think it's more the stuff they talk about. If I could put it this way, maybe homeschoolers, generally speaking, there's more wholesome conversation going on that maybe would be considered immature in some public school circles. I know I don't want to generalize too much, but
maybe just innocent.
Yeah, we could maybe consider more innocent, and for better or worse. But I feel like through just talking to people, sports, interacting with work via a job matters a lot. Movies, TV shows. I'm not saying you got to go to the extreme, but being exposed to some of that stuff and actually having discussions about it is important. And I feel like where some homeschoolers are hindered in that way, I really wasn't.
Yeah. So I mean, you are in a large way just a product of your environment. So if you're exposing yourself to a very limited amount of things, like, I don't know, a specific type of show that your parents will let you watch, or a specific type of book that you're allowed to read, or specific conversations you're allowed to have, like you were saying, you're going to go out in the world only knowing about those certain things.
Yeah.
And I think in public school, you're exposed to a lot more.
Right.
So your environment's more diverse, and you get to develop different kinds of opinions. You're not shocked nearly as much as a lot of homeschoolers that I know.
Yeah, it's for better and worse, or pros and cons. And I think the huge thing is discussion. It's asking questions and having discussions about those things. That it's not necessarily you shouldn't talk about them, but it's like, how are you talking about them?
Right. And a lot of them are just like, I feel like a lot of the public schoolers that I've met are trained generally to not ask questions. And so in the sense, they're exposed to a lot, but they don't think about them. They don't test them. There's no skepticism around them. Right. So those things are just accepted as opposed to talked about in a wholesome manner, like Connor was saying. So it's interesting. They're more exposed to diversity, even that could be debated, but they're more exposed to diversity, but they don't have the same foundation to test things that are possibly wrong, or test things that might not be socially acceptable, like in the world.
And I think, and this could also, these are a bunch of generalizations. I want to make that clear. Like, obviously none of this is conclusive, and we haven't presented any evidence to make any of these conclusive, but a lot of times when you see homeschool parents pulling kids out of public school to do that, they end up putting them in communities that are full of like-minded people. So if I were to go somewhere where there's a bunch of people that agree with me on a bunch of fundamental things, it makes it a lot harder for me to be challenged on those, and turn resulting in a lack of maturity, right? Because maturity just comes from challenges, right? Adversity, I would say.
Yeah, it's a big catalyst.
Yeah. I guess my experience was a little different in the sense that, like, in a homeschool community, I was challenged a lot. And the people I see that weren't challenged, quote unquote, were challenged, and they just decided to turn their face as opposed to actually learn from it.
Well, I think also you were put in a homeschool situation that was not it's the same foundation as you. Like, foundationally, they believe different things. So it was a lot easier for you to get challenged.
Sure, but
there wasn't like 180 like public school.
Of course, yeah.
But I think you did face more challenges than a lot of the people at that co-op did.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you guys mentioned the fact that family is a big part of a homeschooled life. So I know you guys are both Christians. So what was it like growing in a Christian family? Did that help or hurt you guys, specifically your kind of family, the way that you grew in faith with your family? And it's kind of the same thing. Have you noticed hurdles or obstacles from like in your journey to faith from the family, anything like that?
Yeah, there's a lot there.
Yeah, it's a big question.
I'll go first.
Okay.
Give him time to think. So, yep, Christian home. I feel like that can mean a lot of things in this country.
Yeah.
Ranging from very deep to very in name only nominal Christians, I believe is a term that is used and has been used for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I
nominal
think
versus what? Normal?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So I think a huge advantage, at least to the way my family was constructed and formed and shaped, is we've kind of, because when you're doing homeschooling, you kind of have to all grow together because you're actually spending more time together, like actually in the same place. Like one of the main reasons that my mom really wanted to homeschool was with school and sports. She's like, I feel like I never see my kids. I'm sure a lot of parents can relate to that. And there are some parents who, because of their work situation, income situation, school is a form of childcare in some situations. I totally understand that. Sometimes it's just not possible for some families to have one parent at home. They need to have two incomes. Yeah. But because we've been blessed to have that flexibility, we've had to face challenges together, and because we have that foundation, it just helps a lot. And also there's just a level of like example from our parents. They've done a really good job of being an example, not just teaching in words, but actually walking it out, because there's four of us, and the brother just younger than us, just turned 17, has spina bifida and some other medical things. He's in a wheelchair, and because of that, I mean, like you said, maturity comes from adversity and challenges and trials, and I would say there's some level of like relational closeness that has had to happen through him having so many surgeries and hospital stays and just different things that you have to adapt through. And I think without the foundation of a deep faith and deep relationship with the Lord, those challenges would have been handled very differently. Right. So I know that was a lot of words to, you asked multiple questions. I don't know how many of them I hit, but hopefully it was helpful in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, I would say like one of the biggest things with homeschooling, like the relational challenges with our family, just kind of grows exponentially because you're just around your family way more than if you're at school, right? However many hours you are, and having someone with spina bifida, mentally he's just not, he's different than most kids that you would see on the street or in public school.
Sure. Right. He just to clarify, he just developed things just developed later and slower.
Yeah. So, right. Yeah. So mentally, he could be described as a younger age than being 17, but physically he is 17, and that brings challenges, right? And we've just had to talk through things and fight through obstacles that we wouldn't be able to face. I think if we wouldn't have homeschooled, we wouldn't be able to grow, I guess I should say, as much as we have, because we're together, because we're able to talk through things. And yeah, like another great thing is that we do like Bible study every morning with our family, because we're all home together, and we get to read scripture together. And that's one thing that's helped us grow.
Yeah, which is great. Obviously, I mean, you guys know, and I've heard you guys talk about this before, but it's not your parents' faith, it's your faith. And you need to, there's like not exactly a deciding moment, but there is a journey into just starting to own your faith slowly. Every second you decide to start making decisions for yourself. You're like, this is mine now, and these are the things that I believe. Specifically regarding that, I mean, obviously you guys grew up going to a certain kind of church, which had a certain ideology and all of that. How has that changed specifically with you, Connor, since you've left the home, right? You have a different area of influence now. How has it held up? Do you wish that maybe the family had viewed things differently? Is there any sort of hurdles that came with that, or, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to, there have been times over the past year or two where I have discussions with either Garrett or my parents, and maybe there's not an exact agreeing point because there are different opinions out there, and that's fine. Oftentimes I think we find we're a little closer on the discussion. I wouldn't call them argument, on the discussion. Then maybe it feels like at first, once you kind of define terms and hash things out a little bit, you realize like, okay, we are pretty close on this.
It's more of a miscommunication than anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you come to a common ground.
Yeah. So in that regard, I mean, things change, and I don't know if there's a defining moment, but I think it's just as you get older, like you said, you have to make decisions, and you realize that it's not gonna work if I'm living under somebody else in regards to faith. Like you got to make it your own, and that's gonna come with its own challenges and its own, I don't want to say benefits, but certainly blessings.
Yeah.
And I also have seen, I think another thing I've seen, and I'm thankful to my parents for this, is I've seen other people who it felt like were in similar situations growing up, and then you see them kind of take the same steps practically, whether it's kind of going to college, that sort of thing. Yeah. And you wonder, like, where'd the foundation go? Yeah. Like, or was there a foundation? Yeah. You know, it's not like I'm talking about like open rebellion, but just there's a change that happens, and it's kind of sad to see, because it's like, you know, maybe you thought there was depth there, but as you continue to grow and your relationships deepen with people and with the Lord, and you don't see that in other people, it can be hard to connect. Yeah. But I'm thankful to my parents and for my parents in that way, because it feels like that hasn't happened. So they prepared me well, and really, it just being preparation, not control, not forcing. It was like, it's preparation, and then it's up to you. Like, you gotta take responsibility. Right.
So to kind of expound on that question, and I don't want to take us off track or anything, but can you like tangibly put your finger on certain things your parents did to give you that mindset, or to prepare you, as opposed to, I mean, yeah, like you said, there's all these people that, you know, we could you know, list off people that you watch them, you watch their lives, you watch their family, and you say, okay, they have everything that they would need to continue their life and leave their family and actually stay founded, right? But they don't. Ultimately, they just don't.
Well, so I think that part of that has to do with homeschooling, and I'm not trying to answer this for you. We'll definitely answer it, but my experience with it is it builds the foundation of critical thinking, and you taking accountability for your own actions. So like that, I'm sure that had something to do with you owning your faith, and I think that's what we see a lot of people doing is, I mean, I don't know what the statistic is, but I know it's very high, of people that go to college and leave their faith, whatever that faith is. They go to college and they drop it, because you don't really take ownership of it when you're under someone else's roof. Like, things are being imposed onto you. But I know through homeschooling, because I have been homeschooled, you have to take accountability for your own actions. Like, it's your assignment. It's not your parents making you do an assignment. Like, you have to do it. And I'm sure that helped in some way.
Yeah, certainly with the curriculum we had, that was the case. I'm trying to think, practically speaking, I've come to an understanding of this recently, really, I'd say last 6 or 8 months. And this is, I don't know, this isn't necessarily practical, but my parents have really nailed the transition for me, being the oldest, the transition from parent to more of a mentor and a friend. And that's something that a lot of parents struggle with, especially with the oldest child, because there's a level of like control that's just like natural. Yeah. And you want the kid to succeed, and you want things to be perfect, but you just can't do that. And so practically speaking, I guess that was just, as I got older, I mean, allowing me to get my license, what I did, or allowing me to have access to different events, different circles, even just like, I don't know, technology in the way, like you have to, there are boundaries, but it's up to you on how you use the things that your parents present to you. And so they're just, practically speaking, jobs and sports and travel and technology, right? Allowing you access gradually. And then also when it gets to the point that the kid leaves, not that I still live in my parents' house when I'm not at school, but actually letting go. And they've done a really good job of that. So
Yeah, well, I was just going to add, like, at least for me, I'm not sure specifically for Connor, but there wasn't really a sit down moment where our parents had a conversation and said, okay, we're letting you specifically when just list up, okay, you can listen to music that you want to now.
Yeah.
You can watch, R-rated movies or whatever. It was this type of thing that,
gradual.
yeah, it was a gradual transition, right? But what was nice was that then after we were able to grow in some of those things, we would then look back and that was when we had kind of identified and said, okay, this is when you were mature enough to explore those things, and we kind of talked about it, right? It wasn't like we were like, okay, it was on this specific date that we matured in such a way that happened. It was gradual. And I think communication is definitely like very, very key between, both the parents so that they're on the same page, and then also with the kids later. And I've been very thankful that our parents allow us to approach them really about anything. So if we wanted to talk to them about whatever, that we could go to them and grow. But again, it was just, it really is just a hill, this gradual climb of maturity. There wasn't really like a tangible thing that we could say, okay, this is what, this is where it changed.
Yeah, it wasn't like a catalyst moment or anything like that.
Right.
So, sorry, just to continue, what promoted that communication? Because, telling the truth or being open with your parents is another thing that I see a lot of failed families struggle with. So, what promoted that open communication while maintaining like a certain amount of discipline, especially when you're younger?
I think I can nail this because I've seen a lot of this, and your eyes really start to open when you interact with other people and you see how they were raised differently, and you realize like, oh, a lot of people have it differently, and it doesn't look different. The difference is when you're younger is like, oh, Jimmy can have 2 sodas at dinner instead of 1. Like those are the differences you notice.
Yeah.
And then you get older, like, okay, there's a lot of family structure differences.
Right.
So I think it starts with open communication from the parents. It's by example. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So it's the parent, maybe mom or dad or both, make a mistake, and they come to the kids and say, hey, like, I could have done better. I shouldn't have gotten angry in that way. I shouldn't have responded out of my emotion. I should have waited. So that type of example of actually being open with your kids, not like decision-making process, they need to include you in it, like, especially when you're younger, but being open with mistakes, positive things, negative things, and it's a cycle, right? So if they're closed off and they expect things of you and they don't actually do them themselves and they don't communicate that to you, then you're going to be closed off. And I've seen that in a lot of kids. Yeah, and it's kind of scary, actually. It's like you can live in a house with people and you're just familiar with them. You don't actually know them.
Yeah, that happens all the time, especially if there's not, like, luckily for Christianity, there's a foundation that's preached to be open and communicating. And a lot of that, like what you said there, has to do with pride. Because it's not even just about communicating. Like, a lot of people wouldn't find it necessary to communicate a failing, like when a parent maybe goes over the line. A lot of parents like, well, whatever, we all know I went over the line there. But actually, like, humbling yourself and being able to go to someone who's significantly your son or your child and be like, hey, I'm sorry. It does, you're right. I mean, it definitely does open a situation where the kids feel more comfortable coming to you about certain things.
And they just lead by example. The right thing to do when I make a mistake is to be straightforward and to apologize and ask for forgiveness.
And the interesting thing with that specifically is I don't think you really understand the fruits of it until they're much older. So like 18. And that's when you start to notice, like, oh, they're not telling me about who they're dating, or they're not telling me about big changes they want to make. They're just, they're not saying things to me. And you don't notice it until later.
There are certain specific situations I can think of in people I've interacted with in my own life, and I won't go into all that, but there's a level of, it's like, I also know a lot of kids will bring them things, and then all the parents do is tell them how they could have done it better, or they give advice. It was really just the kid just wanted to tell them something, and then they just nag and nag and nag. So eventually the kid doesn't want to bring anything to their parents anymore, because the only experience they have is the parent just, and not that feedback is bad, not that, you know what I mean?
Right,
like,
of course,
not that correction is not necessary, but like when the kid's getting older and they're telling you things, like sometimes it's better to just And I think it has to do with control, and it has to do with pride, because and I get this as a parent, like your kids are a representation of you and your family out in the world, and so you want them to be perfect. You know they can't be,
right,
but you still want them to be, and so there's a level of that.
Another thing to keep in mind is, like, when you get to a certain age, you can't really be formed like you were when you were younger.
It's true.
If I'm nagging on my kid, even if he's like a wonderful kid and he's actually open to taking in whatever, like, it's much harder to change habits as you get older, and it's much harder to form habits as you get older.
Sure.
So that being said, when a parent decides to, like, put the relationship with his kid or her kid at strife so that he can or she can make them perfect, quote unquote, it's just not a good trade-off. It's not worth it.
That makes me think of a great quote. I mean, obviously we're talking about there's a relationship change between when your kid becomes an adult and when they're your kid. You have to come from a more humble place. Like, you're not quite equals, but you're much closer than they were. And then there's a quote from Jordan Peterson. It goes, it's really difficult to find a friend that you can share bad news with, right? Somebody who's there to comfort you. It's extremely difficult to find a friend you can share good news with, because a lot of people, they want to see you do good, but they don't want you to do better than them. So that they'll hype you up. They're like, go do this, you're going to do great. But the moment that you actually succeed and go where they couldn't go is a moment where you're like, oh, never mind. And you start knocking them down. And I think it's easy for parents to do that, because sometimes in a lot of situations, the parents set the kids up better than they were set up, because that's a goal of theirs. And they try to manage expectations. Okay, we can go and resume. Quick break there. So, to kind of segue, you guys had talked a lot about, of course, as you were homeschooled, some things that happened surrounding homeschooling, so family. You guys were particularly active in sports, team sports more specifically. How has that affected you guys? How has that benefited you, and what do you think the importance of it is? If you think it's important, neither of you are, you're not quite in college yet, and you aren't playing sports in college, at least not professional. I don't know if you do intramural, but it seems odd for a lot of people to carry out sports throughout their entire high school career with no real aspirations of taking them into college. So what was the point of that? Like, why did you find the importance there but not want it to be a career path for you?
Yeah, so I guess just to kick off, we were very fortunate in finding, at least I played basketball throughout my whole high school career, and I'm playing my last year because I'll be too old next year. I'll be off to college. But we were fortunate enough to find a group of homeschool / small Christian school basketball league, and it has really benefited us in the way that our coaches are more like mentors to us, and it's not just about basketball. That there are other things that are taught on and off the court about life and fundamentally as Christians about how we can build our character, that has benefited us greatly. And I feel like it's kind of hard to go into it because I couldn't really explain how much it has changed me over the past 4 or 5 years that I've been on this team before. Yeah. But yeah, I just on a fundamental level, it was more than just a social or a sports thing. Yeah. It is really another way for us to talk with other guys our age, and even other girls, just about topics and things about Christianity that we wouldn't be able to do before.
Right. Yeah. It opens some doors that wouldn't have otherwise been opened.
Yeah. I will refrain from making any girl homeschool jokes about you.
Yes, please.
Even girls?
Even girls? That's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, so obviously you guys were fortunate in being put in an organization that was prioritized the things you cared about. Do you think that they're, like, let's say that people can't find an organization like that, they're going through similar things at home. Do you think that there's still value in team sports outside of that, or do you think it's just valuable because of that specific organization?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I was thinking about that myself. I could definitely see someone listening being like, oh, well, they had that, I don't have that. They have that, I don't have that.
Yeah.
And it could be discouraging. I think about a lot of life is what you put into it.
Yeah.
And so if you come in with the attitude of I don't have that, then I can't get what I need.
Mm-hmm.
I think just learning how to face adversity and be disciplined in any sport is an incredibly valuable thing to learn.
Yeah.
Same thing goes for music or, obviously
Anything,
school in general,
Mm-hmm.
but I think extracurriculars is what we're talking about right now.
Mm-hmm.
And also when you're dealing with sports and team sports in particular, you have to learn how to look outside yourself.
Yeah.
But again, if you come into it not with that attitude, then you're not going to learn those lessons,
Right.
regardless of how the team's looking at things. I can think of people who've come through, played for the same program. Can think of people who've come through the program, spent years in the program, and you don't see the same growth
Right.
that maybe I've experienced or I've seen other people experience. And you really can trace it back to, what are they willing to do? What are you willing to sacrifice? How much humility are you willing to come into this with?
Yeah.
Are you willing to see outside of yourself? So that would be my thought and encouragement to those type of people where it feels like they don't have the same amazing opportunity.
Right.
There are lots of people with those amazing opportunities that squander them because they aren't willing to put in the work or the discipline or the sacrifice.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would say like almost many programs in almost all team sports, they have the ability to foster that kind of growth, to foster that selfless, like a character building. But because of like the programs, coaches, and because of the mentors, they were able to foster a team that actually was directed in that growth. A team that wasn't directed to, like, there was no monetary value. There was no hope for. Even the couple, the one player that actually went and played in college, he's not getting anything out of it financially. But they were always fostered the character development. They always fostered the team building and the selflessness.
Yeah. Just to kind of reiterate how important they are. This is a study that was done. So 55% of parents believe that sports will benefit their children academically and improve their future careers. 80% of parents believe that sports helped their child learn about discipline and dedication, as well as how to get along with others. That's from ohiohealth.org. But that's just to reiterate, like, even if you don't have an environment that is cultivating discipline, like the coach in that program specifically would mention that every practice about the reasons you're doing it. And you go into plenty of programs where they're not focusing on that. They're focusing on how many shots you're going to make or something like that. But the beauty is, even those types of programs, you're still doing something that's difficult. You're still having to cooperate with people that you wouldn't have otherwise had to cooperate with. You're still practicing critical thinking ability while you're playing the game. There's a ton of other health benefits, and I think those can get overlooked a lot. And you notice the difference between someone who did play team sports and someone who didn't, especially when they get older. There's another great study. Unfortunately, I don't have a quote on it, but from the ages of like 18 to 24, your fitness life in that age, so like if you're chiseled and ripped, the odds of you being chiseled and ripped for the rest of your life are increased exponentially, versus if you gain a lot of weight in that time and stop taking care of your body, it decreases exponentially. So it's the taking care, especially in adolescence. I think you can actually see it even more in adolescence than you are in that prime age, if you will. It's massive. You have to value your body and value your health, and it's just another great way of doing that, I think.
Well, I think it comes back to if you can't have physical discipline, which I would argue is the easiest form of discipline, how are you going to have mental or spiritual or emotional discipline?
Yeah.
That would be a question I would pose, and I think comes back to kind of what you're talking about. And also what you're saying, if 80% of parents think that sports are beneficial to their kid, I guarantee that not all 80% of programs have what we had. Like, it's probably closer to 10% or 5%.
Right.
So, that tells you that there's something there.
Yeah, something beyond just like what our program had.
And people recognize it even if they don't necessarily understand fully why.
Right, yeah. I know, because I was on this team for a little bit of time, but the time commitment in specifically that program was severe. So what made you guys decide that it was worth it despite the fact that high school was the furthest level you were going to go? So why did you choose to dedicate that much time into something when, you guys really, as a homeschooler, you have a good bit of freedom. You can kind of move your school around if you need to and choose things, and you have a lot of options available to you. So what made you choose basketball specifically, and why that much time versus another program? I mean, we kind of talked about it, but
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm not particularly like the best basketball player. Especially compared to maybe my brother here. Okay, well, you know.
I wasn't wanting you to compare you to me.
well, you know,
Shaking my
that
head.
happened.
I'm just giving you a hard time.
I did, yeah, it's true. But my point is that like I realized maybe around my sophomore year of high school that I wanted to be a part of this team, not because of my basketball skills, but because of what the team brought to the table. So I think that is what kind of tipped the importance of going to practices and prioritizing this over maybe something else that I could improve myself with, was that it wasn't necessarily like me scoring a bunch of points on this team or us going and winning, you know, a bunch of championships or something like that. But yeah, and again, I don't think it was really necessarily a moment where I was like, okay, this is more important than everything else. It was just comparing what I could have done with that time and decided that basketball and what we had was more important than anything I could have done on my own.
Interesting, yeah. This is a quote here, and you can tell me if anything comes to mind as I say it. The quote, "For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it." That's Hebrews 12:11. So how does that relate to the program, do you think? Or do you think it does? Like, was that something you noticed?
Yeah, there was certainly a environment of, well, when it's an environment that's focused on the team and not the self, there's already a level of sacrifice and discipline that has to happen in order for you to really be a part of the team. And so, like, you know that going in. Back to your question before, I played basketball since I was like 4 or 5. So it was just something I wanted to see through, basically speaking. And I think just all the things that Garrett said about the team itself applied. And that's why, like, you were asking, why is it worth the time commitment? And I think that's part of it for sure as well.
Yeah, I mean, to a large degree, everyone understood it kind of comes back to honesty. Everyone kind of was up front and said, like, this is what we all need to sacrifice in order to make this worth it for all of us. It was a brotherhood in a lot of ways. This was for the guys specifically, obviously, but the chant was, you know, 1, 2, 3, the sport, the team name, and then 4, 5, 6, family. Like, it was, family was a core piece of that program, and everyone knew, like, you had to love each other.
There was vision.
Yeah, there was a very, very clear vision. And it wasn't like a mission statement or anything. Like, it was reminded every opportunity that we reminded it to each other, even outside of the
and
coaches.
Especially when we didn't necessarily reach that, like in practice, if it was seen that we were focusing more on ourselves than we were the team, you know, the coaches, thankfully, I think, like, did a really good job of keeping us in check and saying, you know, you guys need to remind yourselves and also each other that this isn't for you, it is for the team.
I think also it has to do with a lot of people are attached to outcome of the game, outcome of the season. And while that certainly is important and you need to have a vision there, a lot of people get caught up on outcome. I think of a story, Gaby mentioned one of the players that came out of the program and is now playing in college. There was a game recently where it was close and they broke down as they had a lead in the last minute of the game, broke down, didn't win. And the name of this player playing in college, who's a freshman, was talking to, he's the coach's son of the high school program, and he was talking to his dad about the game, and he said, "Dad, I feel like a lot of these guys are still attached to outcomes. They're still getting caught up on the outcomes." And so as a freshman, he's seeing that because of the program he, you know, grew up in and what was the focus.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and the product of that, to a degree, is a lack of brotherhood, which has also been communicated by that same player. There's a lack of brotherhood and a lack of family and a lack of commitment to each other and selflessness on that team.
Yeah. And it's interesting. There's people are often tied to outcome. Like, there's not a whole lot of people that are in it for the journey of the thing. But that's the problem, is that you can't really just focus on, like, the journey of something or the outcome of something, because life is a journey. Like, if you were to focus specifically on the outcome of faith, for example, It's like, well, there is no outcome of faith. It's a journey. It's a journey every step of the way. So if you were to say like, oh, I want to end up here. I want to end up closest to God or whatever. It's kind of, you're going to get caught in a mountain that you can't climb, I think. Yeah, it's very interesting. Connor, specifically, this is a question for you, but you've had a good bit of sales experience. You launched a sales office that grossed a lot of money. I mean, you've clearly been successful. So what are some things about sales you think people don't know? Like, you're good at it, so maybe you have something that some people don't. Has there been any insight into that world that's helped you in other areas of your life? And if so, what are they?
What a 180. Also, I'd like to clarify, a lot is relative. So
that's fair. That is fair.
Think of
He's filthy rich. Everyone, if anyone wants a sugar daddy, it's right here.
Yeah, exactly. So
It's true.
Yeah, sales is very interesting. You learn a lot. It's something that's not for everybody because it is certainly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing. You're just learning how to be uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I think what's really cool is you have to. You're not going to make a meaningful sale if you don't connect with the person, and it just shows the importance of relationship. Even if you really never talk to the person again, if you're willing to just be open to them about yourself, they'll be open with you about themselves, and then you can actually help them and you understand their situation and try to help get them the thing that fits their needs the best and is actually going to serve them going forward. And I don't know if any of you know of or listen to Alex Hormozy, but he talks a lot about how if you can get to the point where as a salesperson, your goal is not to make the sale, but your goal is to understand the person you're talking to, the prospect, and help them make an informed decision based on their situation and based on the product.
Yeah.
You can't lose. If that's your goal,
right,
and you do that and they say no, you did what you came there to do.
Yeah.
And that matters a lot.
And he also talks about, I'm familiar with him, he talks about like the value proposition, right? A lot of times in sales when somebody doesn't purchase something, it's because they see a lack of value. Like the money for that item doesn't associate to the value that is perceived for that item. So a lot of times, yeah, you can talk with them, and if they're honest with you and you're honest with them, you can really get to know what they need, that's the first goal. And then you can eventually get to the point where you can say, hey, why don't you think this is valuable, if they end up saying they don't want to go with the product. But I think it's interesting because, and this is just a philosophy that I've kind of found and went forward in life. I'm sure people have also found as well, but I think life is sales in a lot of ways. You have to sell yourself to a lot of people. You have to sell your resume to your jobs. You have to sell, in some ways, Christianity to people who don't believe it. There's a lot of ways that sales is helpful, and maybe selling is the wrong word for some of that.
I mean, not that it's the wrong word, it just could be misinterpreted, but I think that it can be right in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there's a stereotype for sales that maybe wouldn't apply to some of that, but the general concepts are definitely there.
Yeah, so what, in sales, how has that affected you in outside life? Like, how do you think that the principles, like you said, of open communication between you and the person and trying to help them find what they need, and maybe even like value propositions, things like that, how has that helped you?
Yeah. So, it's a good question.
It has.
Yeah, no, right. Well, I think there's a level of, there's a few ways to look at it. So if you look at sales as helping people, which if you have a good product and you are honest, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at it that way, certainly as a believer in Christ and someone who's walking with the Lord as best as I can, a goal of my life is to be a source of life, a source of fruit, a source of, those sorts of things to the people around me. Mm. And so maybe part of the learning is just kind of how to do that practically. Mm. First of all, there are some people that just won't buy.
Yeah, sure.
And in the same way as you're going throughout life, sometimes people are not going to receive the help that they need. Even if you know what they need, practically, spiritually, emotionally, doesn't matter. Yeah. If they aren't willing to receive it, if they're not in a place to receive it, you could say all the right things and it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. So I think I've seen that a lot in sales. Like, I know how valuable this product is. I know how amazing this is. I know this person based on what they've shared about their financial situation, maybe even in the sales call. I know they could afford it, but they just aren't willing. And I'm not trying to compare selling a product that certainly isn't as deep as people's emotional, spiritual situations. I'm not trying to compare that, but I think that's one way is you just learn that, sometimes people just aren't going to be helped. And then also just how to empathize. And how to really empathize, like actually put yourself in the other person's shoes.
Right. Yeah.
It helps a lot, and that carries over to every part of life.
Sure. Yeah. And Garrett, I mean, you haven't had the same sales experience, but of course, I think everybody kind of understands sales, at least to a basic degree of like the fundamentals of it. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on it? Is there anything that you think?
I mean, I don't think anything like specifically. I guess I could say that I do agree in the sense that you do sell yourself, if you want to use that term, constantly. Mm-hmm. And I think there are plenty of situations where you don't realize that you're doing it. I think like I can say relationally, there are a lot of times where you have this relationship with someone and you just don't realize how much either you affect that person or that person affects you, and just how that back and forth can affect how you treat one another, and how important maybe that relationship is to both of you moving forward. So I can say for me specifically, at least in the way that I treat some of my friends, I've realized that, you'll grow closer to people and you'll fall away from some people. Right. And I think if that kind of relates to how you sell yourself to these people, that can affect how important you show yourself to these types of people, if that makes sense. So like if you're, I think
your perceived value.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And to add, like Connor, you talked about how like selling, the empathy that's required, or to sell right, you not only have to have empathy, but you have to be able to create relationship. That's just so applicable in life, like to be able to learn from that and to be able to apply that to life, to be able to create relationships with people and empathize with people whom you don't really know. I mean, that's difficult for me. People that you don't really have a reason to empathize with them. That's the foundation of being able to develop a connection where you can spread the word, where you can show them eternal life.
And I think to go on the selling analogy, selling yourself, when you're selling, obviously there's a level of I'm presenting this. And I think a lot of people think that's selling, but also how does the product then function after they get it? I feel like that's also part of the sales process. I know, not technically speaking.
No, I know what you mean.
If you're relating it to life, you present yourself in a certain way at a first time meeting, but then how are you presenting yourself continually as you get to know someone, or don't? Maybe they just see it. What type of example are you setting as you're walking?
And a lot of times that's where the whole rep on sales goes.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
The pitch, and that's it.
Right. And maybe it sounds great in the pitch, but then when you get the product, it falls flat. Same thing with some people that can present themselves in a certain way. Then you find out it's just a facade.
Yeah.
And so, these analogies are certainly powerful and very applicable.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why I think everyone should push themselves to have a sales job at one point in their life. It stinks. It's not fun.
You sound like Mark Cuban.
Well, because I think even to the people who fail, at least you said you did it, right? There's not much pain that comes out of that.
But I think that I think that sales can be harmful if you do not do it right.
Well, it depends. But you're definitely right. It varies. Like sometimes you can end up selling a product that's bad and being manipulative.
Well, I'm talking about and how it develops character. Like not even harmful to the buyer, not monetarily at all. Like how it can be harmful to one that is selling. Because sales can create an unempathetic, like they can honestly have the opposite effect. It can do the full reverse. You can learn how to not be empathetic. You can learn how to sell for the money.
You're outcome oriented, like we talked about.
Exactly.
And honestly, if you want to circle back even more, you can look at what I said earlier about you get out what you put into it.
Mhm.
So, yeah, you're exactly right.
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, you could. It's a very easy way to become manipulative and a little bit sociopathic because you can just. I mean, you can act. It's like you said. Like you can present yourself really well in that first that pitch or that meeting or whatever you want to call it. Sell the product. You got your money or whatever, and then walk away. And that's it.
You start to look at people as numbers.
Yeah, and that's extremely dangerous. But I think
Yeah.
that to all people who want to learn, like obviously there's got to be the want there. We talked about that. You have to want the journey and not just the outcome. But if you can become good at sales, I think you'll notice success in a ton of avenues in your life, not just sales.
Yeah.
I think it's a super important part of life. And it's hard to really like get sales experience without actually just doing the thing. You know,
To a degree. I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of things are sales, and they're just not. It's not sales. Like it's not your job description, but it
Yeah.
is. You know, it is sales.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just level of like retail and fast food that are sales in
Right.
some way. And if that's the best you can do and you go into it with the right mindset, then you can still learn a lot from that sort of
Right.
situation too.
yeah, for sure.
Going back to what we were talking about earlier, some people, oh, I don't have that opportunity in front of me. I don't have what they have.
Right.
That's one way to look at it too, is there's a lot of aspects of those jobs. When you're interacting with people
It's
and
sales.
there's a product involved, there's a level of sales. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously you'd say, oh, well, they already come in knowing what they want to buy. True. But you're still
Yeah.
helping people.
Well, I mean, and if you have sales knowledge, maybe they don't. Like, or you have product knowledge, maybe they don't. They don't know what they
Right.
want coming in, and because you know that they want the product in the first place, you
It's
can
easier.
really help them come to the. You know, you can really tell them what would actually benefit them and what would be the best price because you're not really getting anything out of it. I think that's almost the beauty.
That's a
of
good
it.
point.
Yeah.
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 Like you really can just help them because you're not getting anything.
Yeah,
back.
it's an hourly wage. It doesn't matter if you have one person come in, you take their order or 20.
Right.
It doesn't change anything for you. So it literally can't be outcome based.
Yeah, you have
It's
to help them.
truly a what you put into it is what you get out of it. It's a great point.
Yeah, that's true. Recently, this is going to kind of segue into a question, but recently I studied a lot about like the law of correspondence, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this.
Keep talking.
I can briefly summarize it. It's defined as what happens around us is a direct reflection of what happens within us. Our internal environments determine our external environments. So it's essentially a really fancy way of saying manifestation. Like it's
To a degree.
To a degree.
I think. Yeah.
they're very similar. This is a more in depth. Like this has been studied a little bit more than just manifestation has.
I would actually say the opposite.
That my research has indicated that this is basically like the fancy scientific way of saying manifesting. Yeah, there's not really like a study of manifesting. This is like the study of it. You guys have talked about, both of you have talked about the spiritual condition of the world, and maybe more specifically the Western world. I'm wondering, what do you think that it is right now? And maybe, is there a way to put God back on the top of our hierarchy in the Western world? Is there a way to almost fix it?
Well, I don't think that there is. Like, you have a number one
No,
thing that you
I
could
think
give.
that starts right here on this couch.
Oh,
We are going to re-implement God.
What do they say? Be the change.
Yeah, there you go. Just do it.
Just
We
do
love
it.
cliches.
But-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was like, one thing that jumped out to me immediately, and I don't know necessarily like a solution for this. This isn't me,
Of course.
salt pump.
Yeah.
But it starts with parents teaching their kids.
Mm.
So next generation is huge, and I think there's going to be a lot of cultural changes as we see the next generation as they get older and how they react. Like you see that. It seems anywhere you look, there's companies needing jobs, and yet you have all these teenagers and young adults who are just sitting at home playing video games, right? And even just fundamental like work ethic, I feel like it's just kind of dropping off. And so I guess to circle back, it starts with the parents teaching the kids fundamental, even simple fundamental lessons of setting your alarm, getting up in the morning, right? And not just being lazy. That would definitely help start, to see an uptick in biblical foundations, I think, in kids and young adults.
There's so many ways you could go with this.
Yeah, it's a very
Yeah, my answer is you can't.
it's not
Frankly, like first off, it's not going to. I mean, that's just. I mean, it's prophesied about it not happening.
right,
So,
of course.
but I mean, the best that we can do. I get
Well, I think
call
I
to
was just saying
action-
if you could give
Well,
maybe one or two examples that you think would help, like what you think is most important. For me, it would be the parents.
A
Would
call
be a
to
good.
sure, and that's
example.
fair. But in reality, like the best thing that we can do, I think, is a call to action, and that call to action is it just starts with ourselves.
Yeah.
We're called to
Absolutely.
evangelize. We're called to know the Lord and make Him known. So we just need to be lights, and there's no way to put God on top in the general West. Right? There's just no way.
right.
But
Yeah,
we
it
can
starts
save
with
one
your
person
life.
at a time.
Can,
Exactly.
can you
Right.
put God on top of your life day by
Yeah,
day?
exactly.
Which is
I
a lot
agree.
harder
Yep.
than it sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all know that. And lots of people know that. It starts there. And again, it's the same thing with what we were talking about earlier with parents. It's like if they aren't being examples, if they say one thing and do another, then the kid's going to start doing the same thing. So it's the same thing for us as we go about our lives.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to hone it in, I mean, I mentioned the spiritual condition of the world, and this is something specifically you, Connor, have talked a lot about. And it's interesting, relating to this law of correspondence that I've been studying, that, you know, what it can be applied kind of both ways. There's a quote here from Luke. It says, "Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." Essentially saying, you know, it can be inverted. There's another one, I think it's Mark, but it basically says where, it might be Matthew, but where your treasure is, your heart also lies. So it pretty concretely can be inverted. So if you have a world that's full of secular culture, hedonism essentially, that you can pretty much indicate that the spirit inside of them is not good, because the fruits of their actions are not good. So, you know, what's your opinion on this, the spirit of the West, maybe more specifically, and is there a way to remedy that?
If I had to, I think I'd have to narrow it down more to maybe what I've seen in my experience
Sure,
to really
yeah.
address it.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at the Western church,
Okay.
the American church.
Yeah.
I feel like I've said this phrase about 10 times in the last 10 minutes, but it goes back to what we said before. We're very outcome based or outcome focused. And I get it. Numbers are tangible, and it feels, you can feel like you're making a difference if you have numbers.
Yeah.
But I think anyone who really stops and looks at it would agree that churches in this country and in the West, they are run like businesses in a lot of ways. And again, I get the appeal, and there are some certainly very good things about having strategies and being efficient, and like, I get it. But if you're outcome based, Stephen doesn't make any sense from the standpoint in the Bible. He preached a killer sermon, a sermon that had Jesus standing in heaven,
And then got
but
stoned.
then he got killed.
Yeah.
That's his outcome. His outcome is he died.
Right.
So that's not a good sermon if you're looking at it that way.
Right.
I also look at Noah. Noah preached for years and years and years and years, and by our standards, he was a terrible preacher.
Right.
His only converts
For
were his family.
Yeah, all 8 of them.
So if you're looking at it outcome based, Noah, no. Why would we care about him?
Right.
If you're looking at it by outcome. And I think the solution is, are we willing to look at the world as God looks at the world, and not by our standards, not by our expectations? And that's so hard.
Yeah,
And there's so many
incredibly
different
difficult.
ways you could look at that. But to address what your question is as best I can, I think that's hopefully encompasses some of what you're looking for.
And just to add some biblical evidence of that, if you think about Sodom and Gomorrah and Abraham's plea to spare Sodom and Gomorrah, just if there was 10 good people, faithful people, just if there was 9, just if there was 4, and then there ended up just not being any good and faithful people in Sodom and Gomorrah, and so God ended up annihilating both cities. But my point is, like, God would have spared Sodom and Gomorrah if it was one holy, faithful person in Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
And I mean, when you look at it from a numbers perspective, it's like, okay, there's like, I don't know, I wouldn't know how big.
How many thousands?
Yeah,
of people? At least.
Yeah.
10,000 to 1. No, just kill all of them. Doesn't. I mean, from a utilitarian perspective, it makes sense to just kill all of them. But no, God would have spared them because of the one. And that depth, that one, or you'd also take like the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew. It says like a light will light up a whole household. All it takes is one light bulb, and it'll shed light on the whole entire room, right? That one light can just bring that much more light, and people are much more focused on just bringing in people rather than creating lights of the world.
Yeah, and I think maybe to go in more depth, because you mentioned the church specifically, they really are structured as businesses at this point.
Businesses, yeah.
They are, like, for better or for worse, and to some extent it's a good thing, right? I mean, like, businesses are built to run efficiently, and we want efficiency. Like, we don't...
Yeah, you don't want to be wasteful, obviously.
Yeah, that was like, we do... The church does make money, and they use money, and we want them to be smart about how they use the money. So naturally, there are some things about business that I want them to sort of learn from, if you will. But as far as evangelizing goes, don't take any business strategy to that. That's like godly. That's a different way of looking at things. I mean, it doesn't follow... It's like when you think about physics and quantum physics. They're two different, like, laws. They don't obey each other.
I mean, it's like when Adidas started, Adidas started the company, the quality was like the focus.
Right.
And that's why they became a successful company. Mm-hmm. Now they have the name. Same with Apple, honestly. They have the name.
Any big
and now they can just throw out garbage and sell it for high prices. I mean, that's just what it is.
Oh, you just dissed two companies.
I did.
Allegedly. Don't sue us.
No, but I mean, that's just what it is. Once you have the name...
= garbage.
Right. Yeah. No, but once you have the name, you can make profit on garbage. Mm-hmm. Quality doesn't matter anymore. Quantity does.
Well, because it's sales. It's all sales.
It's
right?
sales.
It's perceived value.
Right. And that's not good, first off, because the consumer is getting junk. And that's the same exact as the church. When your whole focus is, how many lukewarm Christians can we get into this building? I mean, there's no real results.
Yeah. Well, and doesn't it come back to what you're selling?
Yeah.
As the church?
Mm-hmm. Right.
What are you selling? What are you telling people?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Like, what are you telling people their lives will look like?
Yeah. God is love.
Right.
Show up on Sunday.
It's like, yes, he is. But what way are you framing that to them?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is it the Jesus that, I can't remember exactly where, but he basically, the Bible says, I can't remember exactly. I think it might be Mark. The scripture says that a lot of people believed, and then he basically talks a lot of them out of their faith because he recognizes that they have not counted the cost. They have not really identified in their hearts that they want to do this thing. He's actually doing them a favor by talking them out of their faith, quotation marks.
Right.
He doesn't talk them out of their faith, but he exposes that their heart wasn't in it to the point they want to stone him. It goes from like 20 or 30 verses from many believed to, and they wanted to stone him.
Yeah.
We don't see that in the church or the equivalent, right? Yeah. In many places. And it's because we're so concerned about outcome. If we preach a hard message, it's real. How many people leave? That's a conversation that is had. I guarantee you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you talk about like you Google how many Christians are in the world. 2 billion. Wow, that's a big number. And then you go to Revelation, says the elect few.
Yeah,
it's like, hold on, 2 billion doesn't seem like a very few.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah.
Right. Again, it's how are you looking at it?
Yeah.
Are you looking at it how the world sees a Christian or how God defines a Christian?
Right.
Exactly.
Two different things. I mean, it's interesting. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different people, varying in their warmth, we can say, how committed they are to their faith. But I've had a lot of situations where I specifically have recently delved into the Old Testament and learning about the character of God, because I think that's really important to understanding the New Testament. You have to understand who he is.
Amen.
And so I had this conversation with someone on a drive. We were talking about the Old Testament, and we were talking about the temple and the different rooms in the temple, and then the holy room, the holiest of holies, and how the only priests could enter there, and if a normal person were to enter there, they would die because God was there. And I told somebody this, and they said that doesn't sound like Christianity, and I was like, what? I mean, like, because it's very concrete. It's not like a theory. This isn't the Bible, and like it sounds cultish, like to have to, because you had to wash your hands and feet before you entered a certain room, and I mean there were real things happening there, and they were like, that doesn't make sense to me. So I pulled up the verses so that I could say like, no, like, let me clarify. This is real. But just that right there is this person attends church very regularly, every Sunday, rarely miss. But it's interesting to see that they didn't know that wasn't preached. It was the New Testament that was preached.
Well, one thing I will say is that you talk about the Holy of Holies and how only a priest can enter.
Mm-hmm.
And then you think about, the crucifixion and how when Jesus died and the thunder struck, the
veil was torn.
The veil was torn.
Yeah.
And so from a Christian perspective, that Holy of Holies, it was now accessible to the human.
It doesn't matter anymore. Yeah,
Right.
that's not yes, but it's
part of your point that the veil tearing has no power. It doesn't mean anything if what you're talking about isn't true.
Exactly.
right.
If it's not a holy of holies, the veil tearing doesn't. Who cares?
Yeah,
It's all the same to begin
and
with.
this same person didn't know what the veil tearing meant, which made complete sense. That it was like, of course you don't.
Curtain split. That's neat.
Well, it's interesting because
Lightning.
That's the thing is if you don't understand the Old Testament, you have no sort of litmus test to the New Testament. You don't understand the value and the weight of the New Testament if you don't know the Old Testament. And I think a lot of modern churches, and this is a generalization again, but they tend to forego the Old Testament because it's been undone by the New Testament, as they might say. And that's a part of the danger. It's like you're not, because the Old Testament is nitty and gritty. Like you see God just like murdering thousands because he's like, you're not holy.
Murder.
Killed with intent.
Yeah.
We gotta make sure people don't get the transcript of this.
No,
They
yeah,
need
that's
to get
fair.
the video recording so they have our tones of voices attached. We might get wrecked.
No
That
one
might
write
be
this
rough.
out.
Yeah, that's true.
This is why.
Please don't subtitle this. Be very bad.
Oh man.
Sorry for all those. Yeah, never mind. Nah, I'm gonna stop. Oh man.
But I mean, yeah. So it's interesting because, and I've had a lot of conversations with people specifically about judgment, and we don't have to dive too deep into this, but that's part of the reason that I've gone into studying about the law of correspondence, right? So when you mention judgment in the Bible, people often turn to Matthew 7, verse 1. Judge not that ye not be judged. And then it goes on to talk about hypocrites, take the log out of your own eye to see the nail in others. It's interesting. But then you have verses like this, Matthew 7:16, which is interestingly the same verse. You will recognize them. The same chapter, sorry. You will recognize them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So it's interesting to say that, in order, and we all studied formal logic. So in order to form any like kind of basic thought, there has to be a judgment there, right? You have to understand something in order to discern.
There's a standard.
Yeah, sure. And it's it's interesting to talk about the law of correspondence and understanding people by their fruits, because there's another verse, and unfortunately I don't know the exact quote for it or where it is in the Bible exactly, but it's and I'm going to paraphrase. It says something along the lines of, if you are to sit and eat with evil people, you are also evil. Like, don't invite evil people into the dinner table.
Okay, so it's interesting you're bringing this up because I read this morning.
Okay, wow, that's awesome.
Open the Bible, open the word here. It's 1 Corinthians 5.
Okay.
Paul is talking about, and I can just kind of read some of the passage here.
Yeah.
He says, "For though absent in body, I am present in spirit, and if present, I have already pronounced judgment on the one who did such a thing." The such a thing that's referenced a couple verses earlier is sexual immorality among the church. And it says, "When you're assembled in the name of the Lord Jesus, and my spirit is present with the power of our Lord Jesus, you are to deliver this man to Satan for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord." This is the part where it talks about little leaven leavens the whole lump. If we continue, verse 9, "I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the sexually immoral of this world, or the greedy and swindlers, idolaters, since then you need to go out of the world. But now I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother, if he is guilty of sexual immorality or greed, or is an idolater, reviler, drunkard, or swindler, not even to eat with such a one." I think this is kind of what you're referencing. And then Paul finishes verse 12 and 13. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? So he's saying people outside of the body do not live and are not held accountable to the same standard by God,
right.
yes, but not by us. We can't hold them accountable to the same standard because they're not living for the same things we are.
Right, sure.
He says, is it not those inside the church whom you are to judge? God judges those outside, purge the evil person from among you. So here we are, the same Bible that people say, oh, don't judge, don't judge, don't judge.
Right.
But among people who claim to be following the Lord, who are supposedly living after the same standard, we are to judge and purge.
Harshly. Yeah.
It's right there.
Yeah, I just want to throw this out there. It's really interesting that a lot of churches are very mission based, and like the whole goal is to get people that are not Christian into Christianity. When you read something like that, and it's like, hold on, maybe you should fix the people that do claim to be Christian. Maybe we should have standards for our brothers, right? Like, yeah,
it's because it's hard. It's harder and it feels worse. So, bringing someone to the faith, we know if it's real, God's doing it, and we're vessels, and we can help that process in certain ways by the Spirit. But that's more enjoyable, and sometimes it takes less time in a way because it's like a one-time moment thing. There is certainly a salvation moment, but if you're gonna hold people accountable and be purging from your own life, letting God purge you, and then also being a vessel of accountability and standard and rightful judgment to people around you, there's a lot of tension there.
Yeah.
And sometimes it doesn't feel like you're helping in the same way that it feels like you're helping someone who's, beat by evangelizing. Again, lots of quotation marks used here. Again, please watch the video.
Yes, yeah, for real.
Yeah.
There's be a lot of context missed. Well, it's interesting. I had someone that I was listening to as a bystander talking about the commitment of brotherhood, what it means to be in a unit of people that are all committing to something, and what it means to hold them accountable. What it means because a lot of people view kindness or love as niceness, to be honest, as you being nice about something, being like let's say me and you both commit to reading a verse a day. Let's just say, this example, and I miss a day, and you in turn are like, it's okay, it happens to all of us. That's a nice thing to say, and a lot of people would view that as you loving me, and it may be there's a lot of circumstance that surround that where that might be the right answer, but in reality, love is harsh, and it's real. And it's not you saying, that's okay. It's you saying, hey, man, like we made a commitment. You said you would do this. We all agreed that this was the thing to do, and you're not doing it.
Not definitively, but yeah.
Right.
There's
like
always,
I said,
there's a time and a place. Like love is many things. But yeah, I mean, love is selfless. Main thing is it's selfless, right?
Love is doing what's best for the person.
Yeah.
That what you think with your knowledge is best for that person, and that will change obviously depending on the situation,
right? Which is hard.
It's
which
very
is something
difficult.
that Connor mentioned. Like it's hard. It's difficult to go to someone who is on your side, right, and tell them what you're doing is just not adequate,
Right.
And to do that in humility and with love.
Yeah. On some days it might be it's okay,
Sure.
just make sure you read tomorrow's verse or whatever.
Yeah, maybe catch up or something. Yeah,
Right. But and then other days it'll be okay. So then you need to read you read 2 verses tomorrow or whatever it may be. You have to compensate for what you missed for. And I think a lot of times Christians hear Jesus is love, right? And it's always the first option. It's always okay. Well, just make sure to do it tomorrow, and that's the only option. There's no you catching up for this example, right?
Well, and not even because honestly, like to me, the catching up is even still like very nice. But sometimes it takes a brutal honesty of saying like, I mean, like this is an example between me and you. We've made commitments to each other to hold each other accountable, to be better people. And there are times where I mess up. Well, I say I'm gonna hit the gym at X time, and instead of him being like, "It's all good, man," he's like, "Dude, what is wrong with you? You said you'd make a commitment. We're supposed to do this thing, and you didn't do it." And there's a real moment where you have to be like, "That's not okay." It's almost like setting a boundary. You have to be firm and saying like, "This is not cool." And I think, in a large part, like if that's how we're going to define love, which I think is a biblical definition of love, and if you object, that's fine. It might not be true, but in my belief, that's a biblical definition of love, and we're not even loving the church that way. Like, how often do you really see somebody walk into the building and you know for a fact that person was partying last night, or that person wasn't really following the Lord in some of their actions before they came to church, but it's all okay because they're at church? It's like, no, you have to hold them accountable. Be like, you're praising the Lord right now, but what are you going to do when you walk out this building? Are you really going to continue to praise the Lord? Are you really going to continue to do the things you claim you want to do in this building? That's love, and I think that's what's really lost.
Yeah, we have a lot of lamb love and not a lot of lion love. If you know,
that's great. Yeah.
The nature of the Lord is the love of the lion and the love of the lamb, and there are times and places for both, and it takes discernment to understand that. It's a very delicate process.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to sit here and act like either one, we're doing it perfectly, or two, we know how for everyone else to do it perfectly, because like you said, it's very situational, and we all understand that. But yeah, the bottom line is there's a lot of lamb love in the standpoint of it's soft, it's kind, it's gentle, and not a lot of, I don't want to say harsh, but that line, it's strong, it's firm, it's powerful. Well, they're both powerful in their rightful places.
Right. I mean, it's a call to action. It's
And here's the thing: if you really care about the person, really actually care about them, then you better have lion love and not just lamb love.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it. If you think about it this way, and I mean, there's debates that could be held around this, but sometimes I think of certain friends that have started to fall off, started to backslide. Me deciding to let them backslide because, you know, I don't want to hurt their feelings, or I don't want to get in the way of our friendship or whatever, is me saying I care less about their salvation than our friendship.
And also your comfort level. You're saying
I prefer my comfort to their salvation.
And it really is more comfortable. Like, there's no one denying that.
One thing I will say is that in this life, you're going to have to get used to friends leaving, because not everybody can handle that. And like you said, like, I forget exactly when it was or how you said it, but at the beginning of this, the beginning of the podcast, you said something like, when you said it, I thought of like, don't throw pearls at pigs. Like, some people are not going to be able to expect.
Was it the selling thing?
Yeah.
Just some people aren't going to buy, they're not able to receive.
That's exactly right.
Help.
Yeah. Exactly. Some people just aren't going to receive help, and you're going to have to live with that and let them go.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And this is kind of the last topic, but it does integrate pretty well. You guys you both mentioned end times. Connor, I think you more specifically have had thoughts about its approach and the current climate, and this kind of goes on where we're at spiritually as a world. And I'm curious what your opinions on that are, and maybe why you think that it is approaching us, or if you do.
Again, delicate balance.
Yes.
Everyone agrees. You say the word balance and it's like, yep, absolutely.
That's the word.
Yep.
So I think of Matthew 24. I would just encourage everyone to go read that. And if you're reading that and you feel like some of the things that are being talked about by Jesus in that chapter are happening, then I think that's one way to gauge it.
Okay.
By no means do I think it's wise to put any sort of timetable on anything.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the intention. Like, you got to look at, why does God give us revelation? Why does Jesus speak about end times when he's on the earth? Why? Why?
You won't know the time nor the hour, but you'll know the season.
Right.
You will.
Yeah. It's like, why are those things important? Why would he give them to us? It's clearly not to try to predict it, or tell other people that it's going to happen from the standpoint of rightness, or just as a fact. I think honestly it has to do with urgency. We have to live our lives with an urgency. We have to make sure we're focused on what's important.
Yeah. I mean, we have to live as if it is tomorrow. I mean, that's just...
Yeah.
That's interesting, though, because, you know, let's say we go back 500 years, for example. Did they not have that urgency? Did they not need it?
I would argue differently in a way, actually, because I don't know specific situations there, but I know reading some of Paul's letters and reading in Peter, James, and John, they'll
They-
literally
yeah.
say
Yeah.
what they say.
They thought it was coming
The
right
time
then and
is
there.
near.
Yeah, that time is
And to
near, yeah.
them, they knew what was important, and so the time was always near. And it doesn't matter whether practically, actually speaking, it's near. Also, I think this comes back to, again, how does God look at it versus how do we look at it? Time doesn't matter to him.
Right.
So if we're looking at how God looks at it, yeah, the time is near. Like, of course it's near. He knows when it's going to happen, and it's there for him in a way. He can see it, and that's hard for our brains to understand.
Sure.
So I don't know if that.
I mean,
answers
yeah, and
kind
then
of
you
the
look
question.
you look through history and you see like all these different tribes. Anytime anything bad happened, oh, Revelation's coming. I think that's by design, because we
keep us on
like
our
Connor
toes
said,
in a way.
I mean, we have to live with urgency. And since throughout history, everybody thought that the next day Jesus was going to come, and throughout history, it probably helped some people.
Well, yeah, and I've heard this mentioned not just biblically, but even at like work. Like this, specifically this generation, does not have a sense of urgency. Unlike 90% of their actions, like you'll even notice in their movements, they do things slowly. Everything is slow. Like,
And maybe it's also just intentionality. A lack of
that might be
intentionality.
another word, like maybe a better word for
They're
it.
sluggish. Yeah.
Yeah, like nobody knows exactly. Like nobody's chasing something. It's always just kind of like
Existing.
Yeah.
I'll live life like I'm going down a river, just kind of see where it takes me.
Yeah, they're
and
just
like
living.
I mean, honestly, like overarchingly, we're just heading towards hedonism, and the only thing they're rushing to is the party. Like the only thing they're rushing to is that sense of pleasure and fun.
Sure.
to get away from the obstacles that they do face, whether they are small.
But yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. Like, and I do encourage people to read that part of Matthew, because that's like a pretty understandable part. Revelation's great, but good luck. It's difficult to understand, and there's a lot there.
It's you really have to understand the Old Testament if you're going to understand Revelation.
Yeah.
And it's a process of understanding. I think about how at the end of, I don't remember which gospel, I think it's Luke, and I'm going to look just so I don't get it wrong, because this is very important. And this is a great encouragement to me, and I think anyone else. Yes. Okay. Verse 45 of the very last chapter, chapter 24. He says, "Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures." We're talking about the disciples here.
Yeah.
The same disciples that were raised Jewish in Jewish law. Yes, some of them were fishermen. I understand they weren't all rabbis, but you better they
knew it.
The Old
They
Testament.
knew
They
it.
knew it. It was all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, they had to. I mean,
Then they
it was
walked
read
with
to them.
Jesus for
Yeah.
3 years.
Yeah. They
3
knew.
years with him, almost all the time. And it says, then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures.
At the end.
Not that they didn't have some understanding before, not that they understood everything then, but it's a process.
Yeah.
And so you're not just going to flip open Revelation or any part of the word. And that's why it's so important to chew it again and again and again and again, and go to the Lord for it again and again and again, to go to brothers and sisters again and again and again, so that you can have those "then he opened their minds" moments throughout life.
It's super interesting too, because I can't remember where I heard this, and I'm pretty sure it's accurate, but Revelation is the first real book that was ever written with a certain writing style. It's called apocalyptic writing. So you can there's so many different ways, and you could just all of the Bible, but there's so many different ways to study it. You can study it from a writing perspective. So for example, my last year of high school, we studied the Psalms, but we studied it from a poetic perspective, as well as reading the word. But you can do that with a ton of books in the Bible. So same thing with Revelation. You can look at specifically apocalyptic writing style and understand it even more. And that's one of those books that there's a reason that there's such creative analogies and metaphors sprinkled in, because it's supposed to be kind of, I think cryptic is the wrong word, but it's not supposed to be cut and dry. There's a lot there.
I think because it's a lot of things that it's hard to explain them physically.
Right.
They
Yeah.
are very spiritual in nature, so it's hard. I can't imagine John seeing what he saw and then trying to write with words about it.
Right.
How? And I know he had the help of the Spirit, but how? Maybe
words don't
are there
exist.
even words in the language
Yeah.
that he could write down that would explain? Probably not.
Yeah, it's so great and vast, but yeah, it's super interesting. And I'm glad that you clarified, because I did have a verse in here. Obviously, concerning that day and hour, no one will know. and everyone knows that. But it's interesting about, I mean, you can, like we talked about with law of correspondence, you can know the fruits, and it's not difficult to understand that the path we're going down is it going closer to God. It's drifting further. So, yeah, super interesting. Thank you guys for coming on the podcast, of course.
Thanks for having us.
It was a pleasure.
Hopefully we can do it again at some time, and appreciate it. Thank you all for watching and listening. Hopefully you got
Specifically
something.
watching,
Yeah,
not reading.
Please watch it.
Yeah.
Please watch it.
Don't turn on subtitles.
But thank you. Hopefully you got something out of it, and we can do this more often. So appreciate it, and I'll see you guys later.
Peace out.
Oh man, boys.
That was awesome.
I have to take my jeans off.
Was Toby in frame? Probably sitting over there.
Maybe.
Here, I'll